Imagine waking up one morning in total silence, no phone buzzing, no one to talk to, no faces to see, no sound of life around you, just the echo of your own thoughts. For most people, this might sound like peace for a day or two, but stretch that silence over weeks or months, and something inside begins to break down. The human brain, built over millions of years of social evolution, starts to react as if it were starving, not for food, but for connection. Human beings are deeply social creatures. From infancy, our sense of self is shaped through the presence and response of others. A baby learns to smile because someone smiles back. A child learns empathy because someone listens and reacts. Social contact is not just a luxury, it's a form of psychological nourishment. When it's taken away, the brain doesn't remain neutral. It begins to deteriorate in ways that can be measured biologically, emotionally, and cognitively. Psychiatrist Terry Kupers, who has studied the effects of solitary confinement for decades, describes social isolation as one of the most devastating experiences a human can endure. He found that when people are cut off from all social interaction, whether through imprisonment, long-term loneliness, or extreme solitude, the brain responds as if it were under attack. Stress hormones like cortisol flood the system, sleep patterns collapse, and neural circuits that rely on social feedback start to weaken. Cooper's research on prisoners in solitary confinement shows how the absence of human contact can drive even psychologically healthy individuals into anxiety, depression, hallucinations, and in severe cases, psychosis. This happens because our brain literally needs other people to regulate itself. Think of it like a biological coprocessor system. Our emotions, thoughts, and behaviors are constantly being calibrated through social feedback. When you're upset and someone comforts you, your heart rate slows, your cortisol levels drop, and your brain produces oxytocin, the bonding hormone. When you're excited and share it with others, dopamine levels rise, reinforcing feelings of joy. These are not small reactions. They're fundamental to maintaining emotional balance. Without them, the brain loses its rhythm. In isolation, the mind starts to turn inward, and not in a peaceful meditative way, but in a chaotic spiral. With no external input to balance perception, thoughts start to echo endlessly. People begin to ruminate, replaying negative ideas or memories again and again. This constant mental looping activates the amygdala, the brain's fear center, leading to heightened anxiety and paranoia. Over time, this can distort one's sense of reality. Terry Kupers found that many isolated individuals report hearing voices, feeling watched, or believing time has slowed or stopped. These are not just psychological reactions, they're neurological responses to deprivation. Neuroscientific studies support these observations. Brain imaging has shown that prolonged social isolation can shrink parts of the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory and emotional regulation. It can also disrupt the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain involved in decision-making, impulse control, and empathy. This explains why people deprived of contact often act impulsively, become emotionally unstable, or lose their sense of self-control. In simple terms, the brain begins to lose its ability to function as a social organ because it's no longer being used socially. In prison environments, Kupers notes, isolation is sometimes justified as a way to maintain control or punish inmates, but psychologically it creates more harm than good. He describes cases where individuals in solitary confinement begin to talk to insects on the floor, or create elaborate imaginary companions just to survive mentally. Their brains, deprived of real interaction, fabricate social experiences because the need for connection is biologically non-negotiable. It's like trying to live without oxygen. The body will fight to find some form of it, no matter how artificial. Outside of prisons, similar effects are seen in everyday life. Elderly people living alone, those who experience long-term loneliness, or even individuals who spend excessive time online without genuine human contact show comparable symptoms: sleep problems, depression, cognitive decline, and increased mortality risk. Social isolation doesn't just make people sad, it physically alters the brain's chemistry and structure. Studies during the COVID-19 pandemic revealed that even moderate social deprivation increased anxiety levels and reduced gray matter volume in certain regions of the brain associated with empathy and communication. Kupers and other psychologists argue that humans evolved to survive through social collaboration. From early hunter-gatherer tribes to modern societies, our brains were wired to read facial expressions, interpret tone, and predict others' emotions. When these functions aren't exercised, the neural pathways weaken, much like muscles that atrophy without use. Isolation, therefore, is not merely an absence of company. It's a slow erosion of the mental systems that make us human. Interestingly, even introverts who prefer solitude are not immune. While they may recharge alone, they still rely on meaningful connections to maintain psychological stability. The difference is that they need fewer interactions, not none. Prolonged total isolation, even for introverts, triggers similar physiological responses. It's the brain's way of saying, I need contact to survive. Kupers emphasizes that the damage from isolation can often be reversed if social contact is restored. When individuals return to supportive environments, where they're heard, touched, and acknowledged, the brain begins to heal. Neuroplasticity allows the brain to rebuild lost connections, though it takes time. For some, especially those who have experienced extreme solitary confinement, the recovery process is long and painful. They may struggle with trust, emotional regulation, or social engagement. The mind must relearn what it means to be human among humans. There's also a moral dimension to Kupers' work. He argues that social isolation is not just a psychological issue, it's an ethical one. To deprive a person of connection is to strip them of a fundamental aspect of existence. In his view, prolonged solitary confinement is a form of psychological torture. The brain is designed for interaction. Taking that away is like turning off a person's lifeline. Kupers' perspective forces society to rethink how it treats the socially excluded. Not just prisoners, but the lonely, the elderly, and anyone living in emotional isolation. What happens inside the brain in these conditions is both tragic and revealing. The lack of social stimulation disrupts the default mode network, a system of brain regions that helps us understand ourselves and others. When people are isolated, this network becomes overactive in self-referential thinking, meaning the person becomes trapped in their own inner world. They lose the ability to differentiate between imagination and reality, which is why hallucinations and paranoia are common. Essentially, the mind turns on itself when deprived of other minds to interact with. Kupers once described isolation as a slow destruction of the personality. That might sound dramatic, but biologically it's accurate. Personality is not a fixed entity. It's a dynamic interaction between internal traits and external relationships. Without others to reflect, challenge, and shape us, our sense of identity weakens. This is why long-term isolation often leads to feelings of emptiness and detachment. The individual begins to feel less real, as if they are fading into psychological invisibility. If we bring this understanding into modern life, the implications are massive. The digital age has created a paradox. We're more connected than ever, yet genuine social bonds are shrinking. Many people spend hours scrolling through social media, mistaking online interaction for true connection. But the brain doesn't interpret digital likes or comments the same way it does physical presence, tone, or touch. It still craves authentic engagement, the kind that regulates emotions and builds empathy. The rise in anxiety and depression among young people may, in part, reflect this hidden social starvation. Terry Kupers' work is ultimately a message of warning and hope. It warns us that isolation is more than loneliness. It's a threat to the integrity of the mind, but it also gives hope that recovery is possible, that by reconnecting, truly reconnecting, we can restore the balance that makes us whole. Every conversation, every moment of empathy, every shared silence with another person strengthens the neural web that keeps us sane. In the end, the human brain doesn't just want contact, it needs it to stay alive.